Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Lipson, and What's Left is online at what'sleftpodcast.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episode, and jot down our information wherever you found this episode. And if you'd like a shirt, please send information on our contact form at the what'sleftpodcast.com, and we can get you a shirt. Anyway, you'll see that there's Eduardo's not here because he is having a birthday with a friend of his. Michael's not here because family is sick. But we have again the return of Bin. Pham Binh lives in New York City and is a former member of the International Socialist Organization. His writings on history, revolution, and social strategy have been published by Occupied Wall Street Journal, Counterpunch, Z Network, and other publications. And he was on What's Left 2 weeks ago. So welcome, Bin.
Thanks, Andy.
Um, yeah, so this conversation is one I've been wanting to have really with Michael, with Kenny Annis, who is a former member of the ISO, really with all former members of the ISO in many ways. I talked with you were brought into the organization by Brian Irway, me by Brian Belknap. But this is a conversation that I've often kind of mulled around with Brian. But once you contacted us, I really knew that I was going to make sure this conversation happened. The one about what sort of revolutionary organization would you want to join today? Which has really been after having left the ISO and been kicked out of Lavos for expressing positions, publicly expressing positions that they didn't agree with, and democratic centralism said you can't do that kind of thing. I believe a revolutionary organization is going to have to be rebuilt. Revolutionary organizations are going to have to be rebuilt, but I haven't been able to answer the question, well, which one would I join? Like, what would I be looking for to join? And so this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I'd like you, Ben, to join me on that.
Sure.
First of all, any thoughts, overall thoughts about this discussion?
Uh, well, I guess the funny thing, well, there's a couple discombobulated strains I have of thought about this. One is that I personally probably would not join a self-proclaimed revolutionary organization today, because such an organization would almost certainly be
Mm.
a sect in the sense that Marx meant it, meaning an organization that emphasizes or fetishizes its differences with actual existing organizations, movements, and so on and so forth. And like Hal Draper also had a good sort of he wrote a bit about like the problem of a sect, a revolutionary sect. And he sort of defined it as an organization where membership is based on political, ideological, or programmatic purity.
Mm.
So like the ISO, we had, the Where We Stand, which was, I thought, as a 16-year-old, actually it reflected my views. But what I didn't realize at the time when I joined the ISO was that the ISO's positions were not just limited to the Where We Stand. You know what I'm saying? Like there's
Yep.
positions on Palestine, there were positions on, you know, not just that not supporting the USSR, Cuba, the regimes in those countries, not just that, but like the specific, because there were specific arguments and differences within the Trotskyist movement about, is that bureaucratic collectivism? Is it state capitalism? And then there's different versions of the state
Yep.
capitalism theory. And then Trotskyists,
Yep.
they had their own theories about deformed worker state, degenerated worker state. So like when I signed up for the ISO, like I had no idea, and I feel like I suspect that most groups calling themselves revolutionary organizations, while they might have a basic 5 point thing that sounds pretty agreeable for many people
Yep.
on the far left, I do feel like in most cases there's probably a bunch of hidden stuff that you're signing up to in terms of what you have to defend and all that sort of
Yep.
thing. So that's the difference between a sect and a movement organization or an organization that's actually engaged in some type of struggle. The ideological commitments are much lower and much less narrow.
Mhm.
Like in a union, like there's almost no ideological. You don't have to believe anything except pay your dues and work there, I guess.
Yeah.
I can't actually speak from experience because I've never been part of a union,
Yep.
but it's, the anti-war group I started in Geneseo was just like, are you against the war? Yes. Are you against the attacks on civil liberties? Yes. Okay. So, you know what I'm saying? Like those
Yeah.
organizations, there was just a wide variety of opinion within beyond those two very basic, ideological markers, I guess you could call them, because the whole point was to struggle. The whole point was to be involved in a struggle and a fight, and not have an ideological,
Yeah.
all this sort of baggage. So for me personally, instead of looking for revolutionary organizations, like from Occupy Wall Street onward, I've been looking for living movements or struggles to participate in or relate to, kind of on an ad hoc basis. I'm pretty used to flying solo. Like if I can meet people who are leftists or Marxists or anarchists or something, I would try to work with them in that context. But like, I've never run into an ex-ISO member who supported the Syrian, who exactly matched my ideological weird little, what is that called? It's not a family tree, but it's like,
Yeah. Just
I have a
kind of
very
a
specific
political
ideological.
thread. Yeah.
Right. The political thread that I'm on, like,
Yeah.
is so unique and individual and specific that I don't think I could ever meet another person who went through the same thing I did and agree with me on like all the issues that I find are, to me are important to me. Um, and
Well,
the reason I sort of look for these, uh, I try to look for living movements, and some of them are, like I would argue that the Syrian Revolution, the solidarity work I did was part of a revolutionary movement. I would say that, although nobody in that movement would sit down and say, oh, well, I identify with Karl Marx and Revolution from 1848 or the Communist Manifesto. They were nonetheless part of a revolutionary movement.
yeah.
Um,
Well, here's what I
One
would
thing,
say
oh,
then.
go ahead.
What I would say then is because it may be, we'll see if this conversation goes the way, because what I hear is our starting point is I am looking explicitly to find other people who call them, who would say we need to have a revolution, who would probably say that there's some sort of systemic problem that we're running into, that we're not running into it's not about changing the way the unions are structured or changing the way there are political, like, or changing the politicians somewhere or changing even our union leadership that who've come to the conclusion that all of this, whatever we're facing, all it has to be kind of redone or done completely differently, um, and that we have to live in a different system. I asked myself, would that person have to be an anti-capitalist for me to join the organization with them? I'm not sure yet. I think maybe, but I'm not sure. But I would say that I would have to believe based on my experience with them and talking with them and learn. I would say that those people I would want to be in an organization with, I would have to feel like these people are looking to take the whole thing down. Whether they call themselves socialists, anarchists, maybe libertarians, maybe Catholics or Christians. That's what I'm not sure. And the reason my experience in the union and my experience with the Educators for Democratic Union Reform Caucus I was a part, and how much all the problems that I ran into in the ISO actually took place in reformist organizations as well.
Hmm.
And so again, I'm not, and so I think it is good that you are maybe initially like, I don't even think I would want to be doing that because I think it would be a sect. So I'm probably going to put forward some ideas on some things I'm looking for that you might say, well, that's going to make it a sect. And so maybe you can kind of like devil's advocate or not devil's,
Yeah,
put,
yeah, yeah.
say where, because I'm not interested in that, but I'm not interested in a broad tent because I've seen how easy it was for people to just be peeled away by the state. By the state can either through repression or co-optation can just peel people away and just they wander off.
Yeah.
So and I do think it's going to be necessary if a revolution is possible for people who are thinking, okay, how are we doing this? To start from the beginning and to set that as their North Star, if you will, right? To like and to be like, okay, we're trying to we know we need a bunch of us to do this, and this is our North Star. So how are we going to together work, how are we going to get there together? And you said an important point about different political threads. I feel one mistake, and I'll go back further. The one mistake I feel, and this is why I think these things have been sex, is the idea that everyone has to join in on that thread. Like all the thread, like you
Yeah.
have to, here's our single thread as an
Right.
organization.
It's Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, Tony Cliff,
Or yeah, or
Jockey,
but
and
even
Sugar
the where we
Smith.
stand, even the where
Yeah.
we stand, like here it is.
Yeah.
Do you believe that? And then, okay, now line it all up that way. And the reality is, and again, this is the degree to which people were willing to abandon, in my opinion, their ideas as well as their comrades, because we all had a common where we stand, that our, in many ways, our unity was ideological, not material, or not
Yeah.
built in struggle, if you will.
Yep.
It just evaporated. And that was my experience in COVID, if you will, like, through the scam, what I call the scamdemic, which because it was a scam. And
Mm.
that might get this, like, then I will just tell you that if a year ago saying that basically means this episode gets censored, just for me to say that word. So let me start there, and then I'll see what you like. How do you want to either respond to that or add to that or diverge from that? Because I
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
want to go
I
back
think
to
that's
national. I want to go back further in terms of just saying what I'm looking for. But go ahead.
sure, sure. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing. It's a very interesting thing that you've noticed that so-called revolutionary organizations or self-declared revolutionary organizations and non-revolutionary, organizations that have almost no program or no ideology, you end up seeing like the same kind of phenomenon over and over and over again, no matter where you are, which points to like systemic challenges and issues in organizations in general, I think, across the board. So that's why I'm skeptical of any group that calls itself that is a self-declared revolutionary group, just because like when a revolution, if or when a revolution happens in America or anywhere else, you truly don't know 100% in advance, I don't think, what a given group is necessarily going to do. You know what I'm saying? Like even if you take the example, even if your example is Lenin and Bolsheviks in Russia in 1917, even if that's your model, right? Like the fact of the matter is if Lenin had not come back from exile on a German train, back to Russia, I don't think there's anyone who believes that the Bolsheviks would have done exactly what they did
Hmm.
without his influence. So even if you agree that the Bolsheviks were 100% the model worth emulating right now, we should replicate it. Even in the context of Russia 1917, they weren't going to do what they did without Lenin's direct personal, hands-on leadership. You know what I'm saying? So like even the best organizations in the so-called revolutionary tradition, there's problems. I would say there's no, I guess what I would say is like I don't think that there's like a cheat code, a Bolshevism cheat code where you
Uh,
just organize a certain way and then you get a guaranteed outcome, 50 or 20 years later, like struggle is just so much more complicated than that.
I I would say that, and this could become a conversation about Russia in
Yeah, I don't want to go too far
1917.
down that
But
road.
but I remember, I will just say that there were things I remember I can't remember who wrote this book, but it was a description of the Viborg district workers who were basically drawn to the April thesis because it was like, yes, finally somebody's saying what we're thinking, and that's the way it was kind of described by some of those workers who were like, this is BS what these other Bolsheviks are saying. And these were both Viborg Bolsheviks saying it because they felt their leadership was being very wishy-washy with regards to the provisional government. And
Yeah,
finally, somebody was coming in and saying, yes, that's what we're saying. Like that. What the fuck? Why weren't all you clown leaders saying this? This person has to come back and say this? Like that's
yeah.
kind of the vibe I got from some of the ways I read
The,
like
the book is probably Prelude to Revolution by Alexander Rabinowitz because
it was a red book. That's all I know. It might have been something like, but
okay.
um,
Or Martin A. Smith, I think. I was like Smith, I forgot the guy's first name. He
yeah,
wrote a book about the factories.
that right. So those things really left an impression on me, and even in Lars Lee's description of the fact that there had been earlier attempts. There had been earlier attempts to bring the Russian Social Democratic parties together, and they failed. Like people were like, "Fuck that! I like my group. My group is
Yeah,
fine."
right.
And it gave me this impression, and so I'll work backwards from this, which is One thing I would definitely not join is an organization. It wouldn't be about whether it called itself revolutionary or socialist or anarchist or anything like that. I currently would not join any national organization or international organization, anything that had a steering committee, anything that had a national newspaper, even though, as we talked from last episode, I definitely believe in, quote, selling a newspaper, putting something out on the street. I believe in that. And that's a feature of an organization I would want to be part of.
Yeah.
But so it's not about a newspaper. It's about where the lead is coming from, essentially. And is it coming from on top, or is it coming from on bottom? And I believe that the national organizations that I've been part of have all their branches have not been the root of the organization. The root of the organization came from a leadership, and they, like Johnny Appleseed, spread these branches around and led these branches. So the branches themselves were were built off in many ways, off the naivete or the inexperience of the membership. It wasn't constructed around the fact that the actual strength of the organization was planted into the ground on these bases, which I do believe is a feature of those Russian social democratic parties that came together. They had to be corralled a bit more. They all had their own independent, many of them had their own independent newspaper. They were putting out their own periodicals, their own stuff, and they basically had to come to the idea of like, all right, we're ready to chuck this. We either we think the situation is such that we must do such a thing, or we have some sort of common belief about something. We have been independent and strong on our own 2 feet, and we have built our own muscles, if you will, and we are
Yeah.
prepared to use those muscles together with those other clowns over there who call themselves revolutionaries or whatever, because we all think there's a moment right now. And and so I believe I'm prepared to be part of an organization that is only local. And I would say I would want to meet other people who claim that we need a revolution and then find out in practice, hey, do we agree? Are we working together on this? Or does it seem like we just have so many differences we can't get together on the same, we can't be together on the same stuff here. But the notion, the people, I think it would just be with people who would claim, yeah, I think we need a revolution. I'm done with elections. I'm done with trying to figure out who is going to do there. And then I would want to build a common practice at a location with them. Would we call ourselves anything? I don't know, but that is something I believe in being part of. And what I and then for me, it would be trusting that people elsewhere were trying to do that same thing, and trusting, like little rivers meeting at the ocean, that in some way, shape, or form we would meet at some point. But that project is one I do believe in. The project of working together with people who are directly, like, I can literally touch them. Like, I don't think I could build a revolution organization online. I don't believe in it. There are
Yeah.
certain practices that you can practice, like how to debate with each other and things like that you can do. But I ultimately, it, I would not, the revolution organization I would believe in building currently today would be one of people where I meet them physically, we talk, we we have a basis possibly for doing some sort of joint action around something. Like there's something all agree on, um, or not, because I don't get that. If there were 6 of us and 2 of us wanted to do this and 2 of us wanted to do that, I'm all good with that. Like,
Yeah.
me and this other person are more interested in doing stuff around AI. Somebody else is interested in doing stuff around immigration, but they're not as interested in the AI. But we come back together and then talk about what our experiences were, and like what's it like trying to be like, is there a way to articulate a revolutionary path in this work? Is there not? That sort of discussion is one that I believe. And what sort of agreements and differences do we come up with each other? What different theoretical ideas do we have, and how does it play out in our practice? And what works and what doesn't, as far as we can tell? That to me is what I would want to find. I haven't, and I'm not part of it. But if somebody said they were part of that project here in Oakland, I'd say I'm in, you know.
Mm.
And if I met a person who was like not a Marxist, not an anarchist, but they were like a radical Catholic, but they were there, I'm good. Like, I'm good with that. Like, because
Mm.
all they have to say is, I'm so fucking tired of the system. I think we got to get rid of what all this stuff is, you know? And maybe they think that that like there was going to be a religious thread through it. I'm not sure myself. I don't know the answer to that. But I feel like we're so far away from that. At this point, I just want to have a common experience with people who want to take the head off the system kind of thing. And that I would join pretty much in a heartbeat right now.
Interesting. I do agree with the point that you're making about like how most sects are pretty much the leadership built downward. Like it's kind of funny. Like I know I've heard you say that that one of the problems in the ISO was because or through the Center for Economic Research and Social Change, which was the 501(c)(3 the ISO established to run Haymarket Books and all that. I mean, it seemed like what you were saying, correct me if I'm misunderstanding what you were saying, but it seemed like part of what you were saying was that like the ISO ended up sucking up to or tailing liberals with lots of money uh and and famous celebrity liberals, Howard Zinn and these
Yeah.
type of people because and so that affected how the ISO positioned itself because they were supposed to be cheerleading Obama or whatever. I'm not capturing what you're saying correctly,
Yeah.
but basically that they got kind of co-opted by chasing liberals with money or being buddy buddy with liberals with money, let's say, put it that way.
Yeah. And just to be clear, that was a position put out by the renewal faction that I hadn't considered. But once I read that thing, it was like it made sense that like, of course, our leadership is membership independent. Even though we pay dues, they even have a bigger pipeline coming in from.
Right.
So even if we did quote control the organization from below, that was going to rip it up.
Yeah.
But the real thing is that organization was never built by the membership. It was
Yeah.
built by the leadership with the
Downward.
membership driven into the ground like tent stakes. And so we
Yeah.
had to just do what we were told. And that's how we it, I do believe a national leadership will have to emerge at some point, but it has to come out of radicals who've had radical experience together, having experience together and thoughts welded through those experiences. And they're going to have to say, yes, we are ready to collectively elect, consent. I don't want to speak about what that process would be. We're prepared to, to, to give over some independence to a leadership so that we can be more collectively brought, like, so we can be collected in some way. Do
Yeah.
I know what that process would look like? I don't know. I think the Bolshevik one seemed not bad to me. Like it looked pretty good up until a certain point kind of thing.
Those are
But
important.
that process, that's the thing that feels very clear to me because each the real thing that kicked us out of the ISO was our actual experience and struggle. Like, and when I read about Higgins in the SWP, the guy who was also a trade unionist who
Yeah.
seemed to be coming from radical, it was literally his experience of trying to put radical ideas in practice that made him undigestible by the organization and they had to spit him out. And so
Yeah.
that to me tells me that these organizations have no way of actually bringing radical people with radical ideas and who've learned radical practices and who are not willing to just go along with the okey doke. They have no way of doing anything with those people because they
Mm.
have to get rid of them because they're
Too much
as
independent thinking.
opposed to an organization built of such a set of characters, which as we
Yeah.
talked about, we're very pigheaded, we're very stubborn. I don't think it's going to be easy
Yeah.
to just get those folks together in some ways. And it's going to take time and it's going to take common practice and real trust being built.
Yeah.
Like I told a friend I was working with, and this guy was on the ISO. His name was Alex. I mean, not the he was on What's Left, and he was a radical. He had Shea, and it wasn't Shea bullshit. Like he was a radical.
Yeah.
But I told him, I said, Alex, I have more trust in that Catholic over there than you, because that Catholic over there went down with the COVID crisis, went through that COVID crisis with me. And
Mm.
we struggled in it together and we were on each other's side. All I know out of you is you claim Marxism, you claim revolution, but I don't know who you are. You just have a
Yeah.
set of ideas. You just have some lapels right here. I don't know if I'm going to trust you until we go through something together. And it's not about distrusting Alex, but what I was speaking to is that I came to believe that trust is only forged in actual common experience.
Yeah.
And that Catholic is not a revolutionary, although because there's a radicalization that he went through. But if he were in my organization, I could see him being part of the revolutionary organization I would be part of.
Yeah.
Just, I do think he's going to have to probably come to some understanding about the way the Catholic Church role plays within it, da 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 da. Maybe has illusions about the Pope. But to me, his his posture in relationship to what was happening in society made him somebody that could be like, yeah, join. You could be in our part of organization, and let's see what happens. And maybe he would leave it when the crisis, went away and things like that. But that's how I'm looking at organization, is very much like people who are prepared to face some very unpleasant, isolated circumstances, but do so in a principled manner, and do so together, um,
Mm.
and try to develop a common experience out of that.
Makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you might like some of the they call themselves base building groups. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I've heard you mentioned them last time, like one
Yeah,
in
Philly
Philadelphia.
Socialist is one. I can't remember the names of the others. Philly Socialist, I think, is probably the most well organized and prominent of them. But there were like a dozen or so groups around the country outside of Philadelphia, and they actually tried to form a national organization in 2021, I want to say.
Yeah,
And then for some reason it collapsed. I don't know. I think it was I don't know exactly know the full story of why that happened, but I think it sounded like they were moving too far too fast or trying to jump, like trying to make the jump to,
yeah,
we need a national organization,
right,
but not everybody was actually ready.
right,
It's kind of like jumping off a cliff to the next log or something,
right,
right?
right.
You know, 10 people say they're ready, seven actually jump, two actually jump but don't make it.
Yeah,
Actually, they just don't jump far enough. Like it's that kind of thing where it's like, or sometimes you see it also with like crowds. If you've ever seen crowds, like crowd control stuff, where
yeah,
like, some people will make it across a dangerous thing, but then other people they get scared in the middle of crossing the street and then they run back.
yeah,
So like they weren't all. It was clear like all the groups in that formation were not on the same page, and then the whole thing collapsed. Or but I don't know. Since then, it doesn't seem like there's been any effort to like try start over or reconvene. Or
Even
I thought it
reconvene
was
at the bases, though. Do you think the national, like,
the
again?
national thing collapsed, but the local groups, I don't know if they're all still around. Philly Socialist is still around, but I don't know if all the local groups are still around.
Yeah,
But
and
like, it made me think that when I heard about that, it made me think maybe what they should have done is been less ambitious
yes,
and been like, let's just have a discussion forum on a national level,
exactly.
or if you really want to form a regional, you could form a regional thing before national. Because America, that's something people don't think enough about, I think, is America is the size of continental Europe.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? And like, the European left, if there's 50 countries in Europe, right? There's 50 European leftist, socialist, whatever, communist, da da da, right? And that's kind of what the Comintern and the Second International were about. It's like in America, you could conceivably have 50, each state could have its own organization, and you would have, you know what I'm saying? You would have
yeah,
probably have a mass membership in each fifth of the 50 states. And then, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
because I mean, we're just America's a huge country. The state of New York is like the size of England.
Right, right.
Like there's a level, and there's a level at which also like state politics. I mean, I'm not talking about electoral politics. I'm just saying state politics in general matters a lot, because like the state controls the education system. At the state level, you're funding your schools and the federal government, of course, is throwing money in too, but like there's a lot of political stuff that happens and decisions that get made purely at the state level, that in theory, you'd want to be able to influence or have a struggle about, or every time there's a state budget and there's austerity, a lot of times it's at the state level first before it's even the federal,
Right.
so but that's something I don't see very much discussion of, like when people are talking about, organizations and how to organize and different levels of organization. A lot of times it's like, a lot of people talk about local and then national, and it's like there's like a whole thing in between where like the state level actually matters a lot.
Yeah,
You know?
and I look, I would be, if I had a group that I was part of here in Oakland, and we knew there was a group that was doing something similar in San Francisco. The only thing I would probably want to do is just meet with that group every once in a while and talk about, well, what's been your experience? What has been how has it been for y'all? I have
Yeah.
I would feel no pressure. Well, yes, I do feel pressure to do it, but I would resist it because the pressure to get bigger, I feel like is more about this is a loaded word, opportunism. I'm not trying to mean like it's built more on like we got to get like our situation is too dire and we've got to figure out how to get big quickly and da 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 da. It's like that feels like an opportunistic pressure. It's real, but it will lead you to do things that you're not that you and your comrades who you are work with at your root. It will lead you to possibly leave people behind. And
Yeah.
I'm very
Or screw something up.
Well, but just say like, well, you know what?
Yeah.
Five of us want to do it, two of us don't, but the other five over there want to do it, so we'll be 10, and so we can chuck the other two.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
whole thing where people start to basically be willing to like, I saw it in our organization, leave people behind because you're not with the perspective, you're not with that. And I personally feel revolutionaries have to learn how to build trust with each other and commitment to each other. And and then once that's forged, I'm prepared to talk about how do we what sort of compromises do we make? What sort of sacrifices? But too much I see people willing to just chuck somebody overboard because of a perspective, because of some opportunity, because of some sort of thing. And in that is two things. One is opportunism, and two is is like the opposite of what I would describe as solidarity, as learning how to become committed to each other. Because in reality, we talk about solidarity, but we have no solidarity to offer anyone until we ourselves are able to fight and defend each other. Then we have solidarity to offer another group when we ourselves have done something to protect each other.
Yeah.
Um, Otherwise, it's just sentiment. I mean, and solidarity is not sentiment. Solidarity is literally it's like material that you can physically give somebody on the base that's based on like we have skills, we have something that is meaningful, and we're prepared to put it on the line for you. That's
Yeah.
what solidarity is, and it's something. It's material. It's not just thought.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, that was my big beef with like how do I put this? Like when the Arab Spring, broke out and, the revolutionary left in the West basically very quickly washed its hands of any sort of obligation to aid those struggles. And that's not to say, that the revolutionary left could have decisively changed the outcome in Egypt or Syria or Libya or anything. Obviously, it's not like if only the ISO had decided to do X thing,
Yeah,
there wouldn't have been a counter revolution in Egypt. I mean, obviously it's an insane thing to think. But the thing that just irked me a lot was that like they were very happy to print statements saying we're in solidarity with the Syrian revolution or we're in solidarity with this, but then they would never back it up with any type of resource expenditure or man hours or maybe there's an important document that people in Egypt want us to translate, or maybe the government has arrested somebody there that we should campaign for. Because the thing is, I mean, the case of Egypt is very specific because they're like the number two recipient of military aid. You know what I'm saying? So like the U.S. government actually has a lot of leverage on the Egyptian. What you know what I'm saying? So like if they
yeah,
arrest a labor organizer, right? There's no reason the ISO or some other leftist whatever group couldn't organize a protest at the Egyptian embassy locally or start pressuring congressional representatives to like file paperwork saying where is this guy?
yeah,
Let's produce him. We want to make sure he's not tortured. Like there I saw it happen in Europe actually where because they arrested the Egyptian I'm getting tongue tied here, the dictatorship actually um, that overthrew Morsi. They arrested an Italian labor researcher. Like this guy's like an academic
yeah.
basically, and they like tortured him. And he's not a revolution. I don't know. Actually, I don't know if he was a revolution. I don't know if he was a leftist or
Right.
like, but he was an Italian citizen. So that's why it became like a legal thing because Egypt is basically torturing an Italian citizen. So they had a solidarity campaign in Egypt about, in Italy, to get this guy out of there and to make a fuss about him. But it was like, to me, that's like solidarity. And eventually the Egyptians eventually, gave it the guy. I think they did torture him, but they did let him go eventually. But like to me, that's a real concrete thing that an American leftist group could at least try to do something about in very specific type cases. Instead of just saying solidarity with da 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 da, like you should make that meaningful. Don't make it a cheap slogan.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I spent my years doing after I had to leave North Star. I was involved in solidarity work with Syria, writing stuff, doing activists to the extent that was possible for me to do. And I was just one person, and I ended up having, you know, I don't want to say, I mean, we can get into like the stuff I was doing, but like
Yeah.
for me, it was always like, if I'm going to talk the talk, I'm going to walk the walk. If I'm going to say I support X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to try to do A, B, and C in support of X to further X, Y, and Z goal. Maybe I'm not going to achieve the goal, but I'm going to like try to win a couple inches or a couple yards or a couple, and I'm going to try to move the ball down the field at least a little bit. I'm going to make the effort, whether or not I succeed, I mean, that's what struggle is, it's no guarantee. It's a tug of war. You don't know if the enemy's going to win or you're going to win, but at least I'm going to fight,
Yeah.
so that it just really irritated me because like, and I actually, it's kind of funny. The ISO successor group, one of the ISO successor groups, Tempest. I don't
I've
know
heard
if
of
you,
them. Yeah.
yeah, they kind of do the same thing with Ukraine. They kind of like, they issue statements and they've established a united front of one on the Ukraine stuff where
Mm.
they're promoting the defense of Ukraine, and they have Ukrainian leftists and Ukrainian trade unions. Like they're raising money for like the trade unions in Ukraine will raise money to send weapons to the front.
Yeah.
And so they will help, or ambulances, or protective gear, bulletproof vests, things of that sort of thing. And that's great, don't get me wrong, but like they set up a united front of one to like fundraise for that once every 6 months, and then they have a conference. They have like a panel once every 3 months, and that's like all the activity they're doing. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, but in the meantime, they're posting statements on the internet a lot about and open letters. They love to write open letters to whoever for whatever reason, and just have and like they have Howie Hawkins sign the open letter, and you like it's they're not doing anything. They're definitely not doing anything bad or harmful, but it's just like it's so far short of what I think that's not a real investment of resources, in my opinion. That's like, what is it? Performative? That's what the kids call it today. Performative.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
so this will be because we are going to talk, I hope, in a later episode about Libya and Syria and agreement or disagreement we'd have. And I don't know the Tempest position on Ukraine. I probably disagree maybe 100% with that
yeah,
position
yeah,
of like, supporting Ukraine versus that being that's a US imperialist project, blah, blah, blah. But here's my thought on that, because if, and I don't know, it hasn't been tested yet, in terms of like solidarity, because I feel like what I hope to be part of here in Oakland is if I was working with a fellow revolutionary who we had a big disagreement about Ukraine on, like he thought, no, we've got to support the Ukrainian independence cause. And I'm like, that's not. And in fact, there's a fellow teacher who I consider a fellow revolutionary, and she wanted me to wear the Ukraine button kind of thing. Like, and I was like, I'm not wearing that. Um, uh, and we disagreed on that. But I would say we could talk about that, and we could even maybe sometimes agree to just not even talk about it at times, because we know every time we do, we just come to heads. But
yeah,
yet we're working together on a common project here, and then we're going to have to see how that plays out because it's over there. Because in
yeah,
reality, um, we really don't have anything to offer those folks. I mean, you could say you have some money or something like that, but really, when I think of solidarity, it's this. It's like this. So this just yet Thursday, we had a PD at our work, and there's a guy who I'm close to who thinks of me as like John Connor because I'm always talking about how against I'm AI, anti-AI and stuff like that. And he says, and he's starting to see why that's a bad thing in education and stuff like that. And so he's a kind of a fellow traveler at work on those questions. And he felt very strongly and feels very strongly that as an eighth grade teacher, I'm an eighth grade teacher and someone, two other eighth grade teachers, that we should set a particular standard for promotion and things like that for the eighth graders. And he convinced me that, okay, I see what you're saying. I see that why you want to set that bar, and you've now convinced me that this is the right kind of bar that has flexibility, that students can make it, but they need to set a certain standard. Like they have to do certain, well, on, like, I'm giving science projects, they have to do kind of like put some effort into that science project. Maybe your grades weren't so good in math, but you put some effort in that final science project. Okay, it's not that you're not going to graduate to eighth grade, but you aren't going to be able to do that promotional walk that we do.
Mm.
And he was like, yeah, but he was like saying, well, but admin, every time we do this, admin says, yeah, we agree with your criteria, and then they just countermand us every time. And I said to him, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we put forward a proposal to admin about what we're saying? Because they say it's in our, they say they're letting the decision be on us. So why don't we tell them this is our decision? If a parent comes to you and talks to you, direct them to us. We'll talk to that parent. If you want to be involved in that conversation, you could be involved in that conversation to see how we're talking with that parent. But ultimately, we agree that this is our decision because that's what you said. And he said, yeah, but they're just going to go away from that. And I said, well, here's what we should say to each other, that if a single decision is countermanded, if we see a student on that day who we said, no, you're not walking, we're walking. We are all going out of we're not going to be part of eighth grade promotion. Like no speeches from me, no speeches from Miss Cornett, none from you. We're not handing a single thing out. We're walking out of the room if that happens.
Mm.
And they go, oh yeah, that could work. And I said, yes. And I said, that's what we will agree to. And for me, that's when I realized I was offering solidarity because I was basically saying, I'm going to put something on the line with you right there in real time, in which and could have consequences for me and could have consequences for you, but that's what I'm offering you and gives us real power right there at the point of like at that point. And to me, that's what I mean by solidarity. And I feel like solidarity has been discussed as like a point of view, as like, do you agree with the Democrats? Do you
Right.
agree with
Yeah.
Republicans? And that is not solidarity. Solidarity is actually something that's on the ground. It's a plant that grows right next to you. It is not something that you try to throw a seed into the wind and hope that it plants somewhere far away. And that's and for me, that vision would mean that, Ben, if you were part of our group and you and I disagreed about Syria or Libya, not that it wouldn't matter, but it wouldn't necessarily it would be the basis of an important theoretical discussion, but it wouldn't be the basis of what we could build here in a locality where we were organizing together. And that's important for me. That's what's really crucial about building a revolutionary organization is it's founded on actual struggle together. Not, and that struggle could even be the struggle to work through differences of opinion about important things going on in the globe because I very much believe that the development of ed tech here and the data collection that's going along with it is very much connected to whatever Palantir is doing in Israel or whatever sort of nonsense is going on with the US empire. So these are not disconnected things. It's just a matter of where is my actual struggle rooted and what positions are decisive. Like, no, I love data collection, so I'm going to let my students use all sorts of adaptability programs. I'm like, I have nowhere to go with you. And yet, oh, but I agree with you on your position on Ukraine, Andy. Doesn't matter. It's because the thing we're actually fighting over right here, we're just off. So that's how I see it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I agree in the sense that like for example, during the whole North Star phase of things, I had my own personal view of, you know, what the left should say and do about Syria in terms of concrete actions and all that. But I wasn't making that like a point of unity or like I will not work with anyone unless they see my, because it's not something that's present in anybody's really not really present in anybody's day-to-day life. I mean, I think Ukraine is a little bit different. Well, which isn't to say everybody needs to take a position on it right now, right here, right now, but it's a different situation in that like for example, Russian anarchists were like blowing up the rail lines for weapon shipments because they were sabotaging the war effort on Russia's part. You know what I'm saying? And then there's tankies in America and Europe who are like are trying to blockade weapon shipments to Ukraine by jumping on like train tracks.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole argument about whether or not the socialists in Congress should be voting for supplemental appropriations to arm Ukraine and that kind of thing. And so there's arguments for and against, and DSA's, and this is where DSA kind of comes into the DSA. I think is actually relevant to some of these discussions. Even though you can argue whether or not it's a revolutionary organization or whatever, but like the reason I think it's relevant is because it's on Ukraine, the organization is kind of incoherent in a lot of ways. In other words, because there's so many different positions, you know what I'm saying? That it's like you kind of can't, I would say you kind of almost can't say that DSA has a position on what's happening in Ukraine, even though they have people in Congress taking votes on it that actually is making a difference in what's happening over there. You know what I'm saying? But like, so the national organization has one position. They have a subcommittee that's like, it's almost like the DSA State Department. Terrible analogy, but
Yeah.
where they like
Yeah.
issue proclamations about foreign policy. It's called
Yeah.
the International Committee.
Yeah.
So they're basically pro-Russia, those guys. They're
Yeah.
and they're all tankies. They think that the China's a great example of socialism. They basically deny the Uyghur genocide. Like anything that China does that's bad, they either justify it or deny that it happened. Some of them are pro-Iran. I mean pro-government of Iran, not pro people of Iran, but pro government. So, like, to give you an idea of what their politics are.
Yeah.
But then the people in Congress who are DSA members are voting for weapons to Ukraine and all that. So, like, it's hard. You can't really say DSA's position on Ukraine is X because depending on which group of, which subset of DSA you're talking about, it's like all different kind of things.
Right.
So, it's kind of an interest. And the reason I bring that up is because, I think you and I are in agreement that, like, generally speaking, stuff that's happening in other countries should not really determine an organizational boundary.
Right.
In most cases, I mean, there's going to be,
There are going to be, and I do think it, it's fluid,
it's
but in general, that's my orientation is like I'm gonna I'm gonna tr I feel like currently I'm gonna want to be part of an organization in which when we look at those foreign policy things that are not independent of things on like foreign policy is what the empire does abroad is not disconnected from what it does inside. And ultimately, theory and practice do need to be joined together. But again, because I feel like we're so early, we're so in the rebuilding that my tendency is to say, can this be put aside? Because let's look at what's right in front of us with what we're dealing with in terms of, like what's going to happen at the eighth grade promotional thing at my work, you know, as opposed to what's happening on Gaza, what's
yeah, yeah,
happening in Ukraine. And to be honest, I think the position that in terms of like, hey, that sounds right to me. Like the Russian anarchists interfering with the Russian war effort sounds right to me. Like that sounds
yeah.
like
I
what
agree.
revolutionaries should be doing. They should be making like class war in their country rather than getting involved in imperialist war, which you know,
Yeah,
but that aside, in fact, there's an episode that me and Michael and I think Eduardo did in which we read a position paper put out by an Australian socialist about what was going on in Gaza that I actually agreed with the position. But my problem with those revolutionaries is that we are willing to if we write 100 words on a piece of paper, 92 of those words will be about something going on in another country, and 8 of those words will be about what we're doing, like in relate. And I get it because we're so fucking atomized. There's nothing to talk about here. But I said, well, that's what we should be talking about. We should be
yeah,
It really needs to be at least 90 words about our fucked up situation here that we have no idea what to do about and what to do with because we're completely isolated.
yeah,
And 10 words about how that's related to something far away from us. And I feel like that gets inverted. And so like the example you give of DSA is, yes, I have a critique of DSA, but the biggest problem is that the person who I worked with for 6 or 7 years at my work site, and we were like solid, and I defended him when he was on the fucking hot seat with the principal and like put my shit on the line in order to defend him when the principal was going after his job. Well, when I wasn't willing to sign on the dotted line for telling the district my vax status, and the district threatened me and suspended me for 30 days, and then threatened to suspend me for another 30 days after I still wasn't going to give them that information. Although I said I'm not going to give you that information electronically, I'll give you it in a piece of paper that you can put in my file, but I'm not going to go on Microsoft Sheets because I know where you guys are going with that. And and that guy had nothing to say about it.
Yeah.
He had nothing to say about it. Like, and look, I there are people who are part of our JROTC program that I don't agree with JROTC, but I know them as teachers. They are good teachers, and they weren't trying to get people into the military. They were trying to use it as a good kind of program. And I was like, I defended those people at my work site with my time.
Yeah.
And that person in DSA treated me no differently than those guys who basically, well, Andy's now on the outs. And I get it. Part of
Yeah.
it is they were all like masked up and into COVID and blah, blah, blah. And they were thinking of me as like Trump, you know? But to me, that's the absence of solidarity. And if
No,
you
I agree.
and
I
if
agree.
and solidarity is not something that happens far away, it's something that happens close by. And that's the one that people have the hardest time with. And that's the part we have to figure out. And
Yeah.
so I want to work with people who have figured out, who are in the process, who want to figure out how to offer solidarity to somebody right next to them so that someday 10 of us can offer solidarity to somebody at another school, because
Yeah.
we have no 10 of us have no solidarity we can offer to Ukraine or to Russia or to Gaza. We All we can do is talk, and which is not it's not unimportant, but it's
Yeah.
not solidarity.
Yeah. I mean, I agree and I disagree. I mean, I agree. In general, I agree with the thrust of what you're saying. Like, and I also, a thing that also has bothered me for a long time about the left, and it's kind of funny because for me to say it because I've written and focused a lot on the Arab Spring, but like, there is a thing where Western leftists basically fetishize stuff that's happening abroad. Like, and I think the most clear example in recent years of that, besides the Gaza thing, where people were like at the encampments, some of the people had Sinwar t-shirts and Hezbollah flags and just
Mm.
like, like, like they fetishize it like it's not just we're against what's happening. It turned into like this is my personal identity. My
Yeah,
personal identity is a
yeah,
Hamas member
yeah,
or the hell, which is like I mean that's a whole different conversation. That's a whole different level of messed up. But like what I saw with Syria was once the U.S. got involved in the fight against ISIS from 2014 onward, and they started backing the YPG or which is a PKK front. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But like all these leftists in America who were basically trying to shit on me for saying anything about Syria. Suddenly, their Facebook profile is Ocalan, and suddenly they know everything about Raqqa. Suddenly they know, they love Rojava, and da, 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 da. And it was just like, and and it was kind of interesting or strange because a lot of the people who were getting involved in that kind of stuff were actually like more anarchist minded. Like the split on the left that I saw that took place over that was like the tankies they just didn't like any force that's US backed. Any force that's getting weapons or money from the US, they were like, oh, they're just proxies, they're just pawns, they're imperialist stooges. But then the anarchists were the ones who were like, oh, this is a liberation experiment
yeah.
and this is a commune, this is a post-capitalist society that they're building. Da, da, da. So the point that I'm trying to make here with that is that like because conditions in America or the West generally are so unrevolutionary or unradical or boring or however you want to, or uninspiring or depressing or however you want to,
And yeah, or even confusing. Like,
or
what am I supposed
confusing.
to do?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like because our conditions are so difficult to figure out what the next step should be, it's just a lot easier emotionally for
yep,
a lot of leftists, especially if you're into what I would call utopian leftism in the sense of like I want a perfect society with no state, no money, no poverty, no war. Everything's amazing, everything's perfect. You could call that utopia.
mm,
People who want that some type of, socialist, communist, anarchist paradise and they end up getting very drawn to like foreign examples And so they're like, Cuba is an amazing country to go live in. They've gone beyond capitalism and they're, yeah, or they say that about China, or they say about that about Rojava, or they say that about some place that's not here,
Yeah.
basically. And they have a very and the thing is, even though they fetishize those whatever whichever flavor of utopia they want, it could be Venezuela, Cuba, Rojava, doesn't matter, Russian Revolution even, like in almost all cases, they have almost no connection to the actual people of that country.
Yeah.
Like, and when I say connection, I just mean like they never talk to anybody over there.
Yeah.
They don't sit there and listen and like go back and forth. Like it's just this thing that, utopia exists. I know it exists. Some of them even go visit because they get invited by the regimes of those countries
Yeah.
and they get a dog and pony show. It's a stage managed thing, and they think it's so amazing. And it's just like, dude, why don't you just, if you really actually care about the people, that what's happening in that country, you should like just talk to the people and like see what their needs are, or like, you know what I'm saying? I feel like it's a strange thing to be like, oh, this government is great, but then like if you want to salute Cuba as this amazing example of socialism, I feel like it's a weird thing to be like to do that and then just ignore actual Cubans.
Yeah.
Like when you go and visit there, like do you just like hang out and talk to Cubans and just because then I feel like, if and you just talk to everyday people, average people, and you just have discussions and you get a sense of like what life is really like for the average person on the island and not the party functionary or you'll have a very different picture than what's being painted in their media or in their institutions,
Right.
but like I don't see anybody who's fetishizing stuff abroad actually trying to make connections with the actual people involved in any of those situations. So I try to avoid doing that, when I sort of take foreign policy positions on X, Y,
Yeah.
or Z. In most cases, I've done some back and forth with somebody from that country just to get a sense of like, you know, I read this about your country. What do you say about what I just read?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're like, yeah, that's mostly right, but they're missing this detail. Sometimes it's like, no, it's completely wrong. It's totally not what's happening.
Yeah.
And I take it with a grain of salt too, because it's just one person's opinion. Like
Correct.
I'm not saying the random average person that you just run into on the internet talking about X country is 100%. You should believe them 100% everything they say. Of course not. You
Yeah.
should like be a little skeptical, especially of grand claims. But so it's just I just think my version of internationalism isn't like, definitely you don't want to fetishize anything, but you should spend some time investigating what the average people who live there, like what are their concerns? Like, do they give a shit what Hamas just said? Most of them don't. In Gaza, a lot of Gazans actually hate Hamas, or
Mhm.
or they see Hamas as a lesser evil to Israel. But that
Right.
doesn't mean that they're actually fans of, you know what I'm saying? Like, but there's
Yeah.
very little, I've seen very little appetite on the left for that type of engagement, people to people, person to person engagement, or like to me, that's where real solidarity work actually begins, where it's like, let's listen to the people if we care about the conflict, let's just say there's a conflict and we're protesting that this conflict sucks. Okay. What do those people actually need? What do they actually want besides the bombs stopping? Everybody
Yeah.
agrees the bombs should stop. Okay. What about other stuff? Like, so I was actually one of the things that kind of really irked me about the pro-Palestine encampment movement, or all the protests since October 7th when Israel was bombing them, like one of the things that really irked me personally was like, I didn't see anybody demanding that Egypt should open that border so that people could get across the border and just survive. You know
Mm.
what I'm saying? So they're, I agree, denouncing the bombs that are killing, I don't know, 10,000, 40,000 people, I think are confirmed killed or something like that.
Yeah.
But like, if you care about those people, don't you want to open the border so that they can get away from the bombs? Like it just boggled by, because that's like the number one thing most Gazans that I was running into on the internet were talking about was like, how the fuck do we get out of here? How do we survive? How do we live? They weren't, it wasn't, they weren't interested in debating one state solution and two state solution. And, cutting off the arms would definitely help.
Right.
The
That's
movement was never strong enough to actually do something like that, but something that was I felt like it's a low-hanging fruit to get the Egyptian government to open that border and let some people in. Maybe they're not going to let a million people in, of course.
yeah.
Maybe they're only going to let 5 or 10,000 in, but that's 5 or 10,000 people who, have a better shot at living not under Israeli bombs than, you know what I'm saying? Because like there were people who were getting out of Gaza, but it cost them 40,000 US dollars.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of like GoFundMe's to like raise money to basically pay smugglers. to get people out of there, and they're going through like tunnels. It's basically human trafficking
Yeah.
if you want to, if you really want to get into it. But like I felt like the movement, if the movement really cares about Palestinians and Palestinian lives and saving those lives, we should be pressuring Egypt to like open that border. Let at least some people in on a temporary basis and give them some type of, legal status or something temporarily until this thing blows over and then they can go back to their lives. Because, being stuck in Gaza getting bombed is like the worst. You know what I'm saying? Like that's terrible, and
Yeah.
I just felt like the movement was like totally not listening to Gazans or really, really in touch with Gazans at all or interfacing with them in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
And I have reason, I have my analysis of why I think that is, but I feel like that's like, I feel like you kind of shouldn't do that. Me
Mm.
personally, I couldn't, anytime something happens abroad, that I think is important. Maybe I should, I don't know. I'm not issuing press releases to take a position because I don't represent an organization,
Right.
of course.
Right. Yeah.
But, I do like dig in and find out like what do Chinese people say about Taiwan? What do Taiwanese people say about Taiwan? Like I try to at least have some sense of where the public is and where the average person is on the stuff before I open my leftist mouth
Mm.
and
Yeah.
pontificate about stuff, because I don't want to like say stuff that isn't true about somebody else's country or somebody else's situation,
Yeah.
So, which isn't to, again, I'm in agreement with you that like a lot of leftists spend way too much time and energy on stuff that they have no control over. Like who runs Gaza, right? Like we have no control. We have no real control over whether
Yeah.
Hamas runs Gaza or not,
Yeah.
obviously. But that being said, when there were protests in America about the issue, I feel like, the people who really care about that issue should also be trying to engage with the people that they're supposedly saving or helping. Like,
Yeah.
seems like obviously, and I kind of, and retroactively, I kind of looked at ISO anti-war work in the same way, with the same kind of criticism. Like, I don't remember us ever really trying to engage with Afghans
Mm.
or Iraqis
Hmm.
for that matter. Like there was after the invasion first happened and the occupation, I do remember they did reprint like the statements of like the Iraqi trade union movement because the initial occupation by Paul Bremer actually decided to keep Saddam Hussein's anti-union laws on the books.
Hmm.
So the Iraqi unions were like, pissed off about that, because that was like, I mean, you're keeping a fascist labor law on the books under an American occupation,
Right.
despite saying you're bringing democracy. So like so I remember, there was some discussion of that at the time, but like besides that, there was like almost nothing about, you know, what are the conditions Iraqis are actually like. I don't even know. I don't even know 20 years later what was the average Iraqi sentiment about X, Y, and Z, or what was the problems that they in the post-war period, like what did they want? Like I don't really know because we didn't really engage anybody in them. So I feel like, internationalism, writ large, has to involve, in my opinion, has to be meaningful, has to involve some at least dialogue. It doesn't have to mean you have to take a position or whatever, but like I feel like I want to know at least what are the leftists of X country saying? What are the average people of X country saying before I, open my mouth about the situation? Because, there's a lot of conflicts and like there's wars all over Africa, right? That are happening. There's like 5 wars happening in Africa
Yeah.
right now. I don't know a damn thing about any of them. And
Yeah.
I actually feel kind of bad because it's like a lot of people are being killed. Like I don't speak any of the languages. I have no idea what those people want or what they're asking the US government to do or the international community or the UN. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
anything, But if I was to like start looking at those, if I was to take a position or start, trying to figure out what should the left do about that, I would totally, try to find people who speak English from those countries and be like, inform me, educate me, tell me
Yeah.
what am I missing? What do I not know about your country? I feel like there's not a lot of that on the left. And I think it actually connects back to what you were saying in the first discussion we had about the whole listening, fake listening. Like the ISO, we had a practice of fake listening. Well, the current left has a practice of no listening. They're not even fake listening. They just issue proclamations about how Hamas is doing resistance and this is great. No, no, no. It's like, you know, did you even talk to anybody from Gaza before you wrote this? Like,
Right.
you could just not say something. you know, there's plenty of conflicts I don't say anything about because I don't know. I don't know a damn thing. Like the Labour Party is doing X in Britain. Isn't this terrible? I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea. I
I mean,
don't know enough. So
the there's a lot. Okay, so you said a lot. So let me think about
yeah,
it.
sorry.
No,
I
no,
went
no,
on
it's fine.
and
That's good.
went
This
on.
is why. So one of this is going to come back, and I hope I hit all the threads that I wanted to hit as I listened to what you were saying. Um, because first of all, I believe not just what's going on across the water is important on its own merits, like because those are fellow workers, and I do believe my country is playing a horrible role in making my life worse, but also their life worse, and I don't like that, and I want to be part of making it so that we don't have to deal with like there are plenty of bad things that can happen to humans without having in my opinion, capitalist structure just sitting on top of us, making our lives miserable. And I'd like for humanity to live in another way. Whether that would be a utopia, I don't even know. All I know is I believe it could be better if humans could decide their fate together instead of having essentially the drive for profits and all that comes with it, forcing this on us, and as well as whatever sort of fucked up shit our rulers have to be hazed into believing about themselves and us in order to get them to do like the horrible shit they do and be like and literally be thrilled to do it, like to be thrilled to get a body count, which apparently these people are constructed that way now. I don't think they were born that way, but they've become that way through some process of secret society nonsense that might look like Eyes Wide Shut or something like that, that it was, whatever. But anyway, I'm going off. The one thing that I was surprised you said in our last thing, and pleasantly surprised, because most people in the ISO couldn't stand to sell the paper, because it was embarrassing and it was da 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 da. But I think that you probably had an experience similar to mine. I was first of all, the problem with the paper was the actual paper, what was on the paper. The problem wasn't going out and selling or putting pieces of paper in front of people. The problem, in my opinion, was that is a crappy paper, and created by a steering committee that was disconnected from the base, and it was constructed that way. So, but I believe in the idea of meeting people near you and handing them something that says, "Here's what's going on. Here's what I think is going on. Take a look at it. What do you think?" And do you agree? Like that experience, that very local experience of organizing, and like you said, getting a sense of what other people think about this. Are people even like, is it on their radar or not? I completely agree with that. Is very important locally, but as you noted, it can be important internationally. But but for me, if somebody was telling me I'm going to go over to to Palestine, or I'm going to fly to Israel and get into Palestine and try to talk with people, maybe to write a report, I guess something like that. But if they thought that they were going to change something, I'd say you're going to have to live there. You're going to have to go there and just relocate there and live there and learn the language, meet the people, and then you can try to figure out how to do. Because if you come back, all you can do is give us some better information about what's happening. And the for me, the reason to look at those things and see what the US is doing and what is just to get a sense of like the state of class struggle. What is the ruling class doing? Like I try to make predictions that help me evaluate, is Marxism letting me see, giving me any deeper vision into what's happening, so that when I think it did help me when everyone thought the negotiations in the war in Ukraine were going to end, and I was like, no, they aren't. I wanted to say that because I wanted, if it didn't come true, I was going to have to reevaluate like what the way I looked at the world.
Hmm.
And in this case, I was like, okay, that's right. That doesn't still mean I'm right. It just means that my way of looking at this conflict has been confirmed so far in practice. At the same time, I thought Venezuela was going to be their Vietnam, and well, certainly doesn't look that way right now. So I was like, okay, I have some misunderstandings about what the interpenetration of the U.S. ruling class into these things, and da 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 da. So I realized that my prediction about what might happen there was really way off. So I have to do a reevaluation of how I see what the situation in the U.S. and it has caused me to be much more tenuous in being like, what's going on right now in Iran? Are they winning? Are they losing? Like you can make any case you want, but right now I'm much because of what happened in Venezuela, I'm a little bit more off on my back foot about evaluating what's happening here. At the same time, I try to remind myself that those things are far away from me and that my job in the relationship to those events is to figure out how I can take down my government and to put them in the and take down the institutions around me because these are the ones that are at play here. And this is what that's what liberation is going to be about, is going to be about us reconstructing our own and ignoring those and seeing them topple. Um, and so in reality, probably my biggest compliment, even though I wasn't involved in the movement because I was more around immigrant rights stuff at my school, and around, dealing with ICE shit. But Michael was involved in the Palestine stuff. One of my possibly biggest compliments about that struggle is one, they put their potential careers on the line in relationship to trying to stop it. But
Yeah.
what they were trying to stop was funding of divestment, right? Divestment of the U.S. military from these schools, or the schools from the U.S. military. And to me, it's not all that, like, look, there's plenty of other funding sources for the U.S. military, as we can see. They just print more money. But that to me, like, it looked like they were putting material pressure on the U.S. imperial project at home, and I support that.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of that position around Egypt or whatever, I didn't even know about that debate, and I'm not sure I would have
I don't think
weighed.
there was a debate, which is
Well,
kind of
yeah,
funny. But yeah,
but I would compliment. I think I would have a compliment of that movement because it was trying to actually pull out the Jenga pieces at home on the empire, and in that regard, it was very much material, and they were offering real solidarity in trying to force their schools to divest,
yeah,
and just to whatever extent pressure that might put on the U.S. military and on the schools themselves.
yeah.
So
No, I
that
agree. I agree that's smart strategy
or
instead of
that's
just saying
real.
free Palestine in abstract,
Right, because it's real at
Right.
least. Like I could, and it's real because ultimately, as a revolutionary, I'm not trying to free Palestine. I'm trying to free us here in the United States, and that part of that project will free all the different bases like that. That is really my goal here. Like my goal is to take down my own government, and if we do that, there's a lot of things that get better across the globe and a lot of things that open up for workers in their struggle to do what they're trying to do. And and as skeptical as I am in trying to build a national organization right now, I'm even more skeptical of this notion of building an international organization because that even has bigger problems of grant of of you know of grandeur, of like ideas of grandeur for yourselves.
Yeah,
And in some ways, I think what's happened to us revolutionaries, I feel like it's almost like alienation. Like the more alienated we have become, the more we spend our time in these dream states, talking and thinking about other people's struggles somewhere else. It's almost like the metaverse, people existing in a computer world, a virtual world, as opposed to trying to figure out, okay, how is what I'm thinking about there connected to what I'm doing right here? And if it's not connected to that, then how is that thinking helping you? Like, and that to me is something that it's almost like a drug we have to unhook ourselves from and force ourselves to look at the very grim situation we have here. Because in reality, if you want to use the Matrix analogy, partly I feel like people are blue pilling themselves by thinking about other people's struggles so they don't have to actually swallow the red pill of looking at how hopeless it seems here and how little I know about what I'm supposed to do. Like if somebody asked me, "Well, Andy, you want a revolution. What do you say I should do? Or what are you doing? Like, do you know what you're doing?" I would say, "I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I know I'm doing stuff, but I don't know if it has a relationship to that final thing because I feel so atomized." And
yeah,
that's a fucking shitty feeling. But that's the reality I think revolutionaries have to come to grips with is our actual situation here as opposed to fantasizing and making little stories up in their head about somebody else's struggle. Because I think it's actually keeping us from attending to our actual situation here.
yeah. I mean, I think what you're talking about is actually probably part of the psychological reason why many people stayed in the ISL, even though they weren't happy about, you know,
Yeah.
the newspaper is not that great, or whatever their problem or criticism or issue was, like, because at least we're together, at least I'm in the same boat with
Correct.
roughly a bunch of other people who full more or less I'm on the same page with on all these issues, and it's not so alienating and isolating to be alone. One thing I actually wanted to something you mentioned Jim Higgins earlier. Well, his book was called Another One for the Locusts or something like
Yeah,
that.
he wrote a
He
few.
wrote,
There was
yeah, I
one that was
read.
like all white and black, and I can't remember what the title was.
Okay. I read his stuff at the time in 2013 when I was writing about, all this Leninism stuff. The one It's actually the International Socialists that which was the precursor of the SWP. It's probably one of the few cases of radical left or Marxist organizations actually starting to develop a real following or
Hmm.
hearing or however you want to call it in the working class itself. And it just seemed like they kind of short-circuited the process. Tony Cliff was just like, "Oh, now it's time to form the Bolshevik Party." And
Yeah.
it just totally destroyed the thing that they were building that was like kind of seemed like it was
Yes.
kind of a good thing, because it was people who were not happy with the Communist Party, because the Communist Party of Britain at a certain point became like Euro-communist or something, and had become, you could call them reformist or indistinguishable from regular old social democracy. So they managed to pick up a lot of militants because Tony Cliff had been writing about incomes policy or something and factory legislation in the 50s and 60s. And they were taking a kind of oppositional stance to stuff that the Communist Party at that time was not. So they had, working class militants kind of in their milieu or in their periphery and coming to their meetings and participating in, shop steward activities and this kind of thing. So like I think that kind of points to the fact that Lenin, quote unquote, Leninism doesn't work, but the thing that does work is like what you're talking about, which is basically rank and file, direct person organizing as should be the entry level of, whatever organization eventually grows up has to start at the cellular kind of level. To be a successful organism, you have to actually have a functioning cell first, and
Right.
then eventually you want to have a bunch of functioning cells. And I feel like that might be a good starting place for people who, who think of themselves as revolutionaries. And that's actually something Hal Draper mentioned in his. He wrote a couple of pieces about the problem of microsects, and his alternative to a microsect was basically what he called a hang loose formation of you and your friends, or you and your coworkers, or you and your whoever
Yeah.
you want to work with, and you guys just work together. And then if you find a publication that you like, he called it a political center. You would subscribe to that, or you could put out your own.
You
You
make
could put
your
out
own.
your own.
That's important to me. You make your
Yeah,
own publication. Like
you can make your own
you
publication.
have. I mean, I would actually. I don't. Obviously, I don't know, but my
Yeah,
instinct is people have to write their own stuff, put out their own stuff, and get the experience of that. Like I feel like that to me is really important. Like now, if people said they didn't, okay, but I feel like then that means they are by almost by definition they're not reaching out. They're not doing that thing that you and I had to do when we did with the paper or pamphlets or things like that, where you go and meet strangers and talk to strangers about politics, but you're doing it in your locale. So, and
yeah,
that's what you're doing when you did your morning labor sale or when we
yeah.
went on the street corner. And I think our group led, what did he call it? A hanging loose
He
something?
called it a hang loose formation or hang loose
Well,
group is
so
what he
when I'm
said.
in my hang loose formation might have actual ideas about, hey, we should produce this thing and go there with it and do this with it. Like, and then that would change sometimes. Like you might go somewhere else and produce a different thing, but have that experience of a relationship between the ideas you put out and the organizing you're trying to do and how to talk to people and building a profile for your hang loose formation. I very much
Yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah,
And
I mean that was like the building block. That was the initial embryonic building block of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in the
yeah,
1890s. Basically, they started with study circles, then they went to like factory circles, which was kind of a mix of study circle and
yeah,
factory agitation. You put out a leaflet, try to get a strike going, try to raise money for strikers, this type of thing. And then over time, these things, you had 50 or 100 of these across all of Russia, all these little groups of people doing similar stuff. And then
Yeah.
eventually you kind of decide it makes sense to form a party, or try to form a party. Um, so that's one of the flaws of the fact that like you can't do it from the top down, like you were saying. You can't go from the top down. Like you can't have a central committee and then the central committee commit creates all the branches.
Right.
That's not how you create a tree, a living tree that actually
Right.
can
Right.
withstand any type of
And
work.
I want to be clear, like I don't even think like even like you know how you talked about you built your anti-war group to kind of be like self-fulfilling. Like even
Yeah,
if you and
self-replicating.
I wanted
Yeah.
to do it like a nice way, a good way, like we're gonna be a national, we're gonna call ourselves a national committee, but we're gonna like be cool and like let people. It just doesn't work that way. Like
Yeah.
it has to build up its own. Like it has to almost, if it you can't plant it in the ground, it has to come out of the ground itself. And then when it starts to flower, then you can
Yeah.
start to say, okay, well that's looks that I really believe in that process.
Yeah.
And I also believe though that like you were saying that anti-war group progressed into something and it's still alive today. You have an actual experience in what it would be to be part of an organization and keep it going. So that's something that could be shared. Like your experience could then be shared with others, like me, who's saying, "Hey, I'm part of this organization. How should we run it? Here's how we did it over here in New York, and here's how I made it kind of like you could take anyone out and be like da 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 da." That's the kind
Yeah.
of like sharing technologies, if you will, with each other that I would believe in and think would bear fruit.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I after through Occupy, I came to the sort of conclusion, and through my anti-war stuff at Geneseo, that like personally, my personal, and one of the reasons why I don't think I really wouldn't want to join DSA or any, even a socialist group nowadays, is like I feel like I'm the most useful if I'm the one socialist or the one Marxist or the one whatever in a group of 10 or 20 people who are not.
Hmm.
I feel like that's the most useful way to kind of be a Marxist or whatever, revolutionary Marxist, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like if each person who read, the Communist Manifesto and, wants to act in line with its, general guidance or whatever, if each person who did that had a circle of 10, 20 people that they were engaging some type of common work with, I mean, that would be amazing. That would be like we'd be
That's
so
a
far more advanced than we actually are.
correct.
Whereas like I've been, where I've actually gone to a DSA meeting and in the same church where the ISO had its same meeting up in Harlem. And I was actually kind of sad that like almost none of the people in that meeting from 20 years ago from the ISO is still active now in DSA or outside of DSA. Like, it's like 10% of whoever was active is still, active now. So I was kind of sad about that. But like, yeah, me personally, like, I just don't see for me like a role. I don't think it would be useful for me or for DSA or any socialist group to have me in there. Like, I don't think it would be a good synergy. Like, it would just be me butting heads with people all the time
Correct.
of stuff. And it's like, that's not useful, you know?
But that's because like you asked 2 weeks ago when we were talking, you said, wait, why is it that the ISO isn't recruiting some of like the best leaders, like the most active people? Like, why doesn't
Yeah.
it do that? And the answer is because it doesn't have a home for them because all it's going to do is argue with them like it did with Higgins and then kicks him out. Like,
Yeah.
and that's a problem. That's not a problem for the person bringing the arguments. It's a problem for the organization. It means the organization is literally it's 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 barren. It can't grow. It can't assemble radicals together and do anything with them because they find the radicals come in and they're like immediately butting heads with them and they don't.
Yeah.
And the only way it knows how to deal with it is like get the fuck out of here. Like I don't know what to do with you. And
Yeah.
so that riddle is going to have to be answered because there is a riddle there. A riddle of how do you take people who have to be strong-willed enough to deal with all the bullshit they're taking from the state and the head fixing and the psyops. How do you get those people to collaborate and talk and listen and debate and then coordinate? That riddle has not been, well, I'll say that riddle has not only not been solved by revolutionary organizations, it has been they peed in the water basically. Like they've done a lot of damage to that project by distorting it with democratic centralism and at least what they claim is democratic centralism and being how do we punch above our weight and things like that. It's like no, we need to figure out how to get people to collaborate with each other. And I would again say Maoists working with Stalinists, working with anarchists, working with non-revolutionaries, like you said.
Yeah,
I don't know where the line is. Like the woman who I work with, who we don't agree with Ukraine, she's a comrade of mine. She's a revolutionary. She's just gotten my opinion, the wrong position around Ukraine. I care. I know. I care, but I don't care. Like
yeah,
it doesn't make a difference between whether or not we can do work together here in this. That currently does not make a difference. Could
right,
it? It could, but it doesn't.
right.
And we just kind of agree to disagree. And sometimes I bring up things like, "Did you see that?" Da, 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 da. And she's like, "I know what you're getting at, Andy," but blah blah blah. Like so that to me is so. If I was in New York,
Yeah,
and I am a person familiar with Marx, I would want to see if Bin and other revolutionaries in New York would want to try to figure out how to work together. Because I think I feel like there's something we have to learn how to do together because we've been taught really poor, horrible practices. And we have to figure out which of those practices need to be taken forward and which have to be jettisoned. And so, in that regard, it isn't good enough to have just one Marxist. If there's two or three Marxists or revolutionaries, I would say, hey, is there a way we can work together? Is there a way we can? I'm not even going to form what's that called? Whatever that guy called it, the
circle, 20 circle, hang loose group
hang
policy.
loose group
Yeah,
to see if we can figure some things out about how to proceed. Because I know you and I disagree about Libya, Ben, but we both see this as an important cause here. Let's see what we can put into practice. And that's the process that I think I would want to be self-conscious of. But the reality is I haven't found any bins here. People like bin here.
yeah,
But if I did, I mean, Jeff Strahl is somebody who lives in Berkeley, but I feel like we're not in the same zones and stuff like that to work
yeah.
together.
Different
He's
geography.
part of a study group with him, and he listens to this stuff here. But if I can find somebody at my work or in my neighborhood, then I would say maybe we should try to do something. I don't know what it is, but maybe we should do that. That's what I mean by building an organization. It's barely anything. It's two pieces of lint connecting to it to make it a bigger piece of lint. But that's where things are at to me.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think I would say, I mean, I get where you're coming from. I would definitely say that like if anybody's in a situation where in their town or city there's all these, in New York City, there's a million groups doing a million things. And
Mm.
I'm sure there's people reading manifesto readers I can't possibly, know all of these groups and put them all together, but I think the connections can, sometimes will emerge organically. Like the anti-war group that I was in Geneseo, like we sent people to a national demonstrations and regional conferences to coordinate anti-war stuff. So I feel like some of that can come out organically. And I would assume if you're in a school district, there's got to be other schools, or sites or whatever where, people are going through the same issues. And maybe that's where the thing to go is like at my school. One thing I forgot to mention in the 3 hour podcast I was on, 3 hours. But one thing I forgot to mention is that like at one point my high school, the social justice ISO front group I was part of, like we actually had an underground newsletter or newspaper that we were putting out because people were mad that they were getting rid of the Japanese program because they were going to turn the school into an international baccalaureate thing. I don't know if you know about all that stuff, but
Mm.
like it was a way of getting other people to write up their grievances and things that I personally didn't take the Japanese class. I didn't really care that much about it, but I was kind of I did understand why people were mad about it and that the process that in which it was done was not transparent. And 'cause some kids, if you take Japanese 2 years, you want to take the third year and the fourth year, right?
Yeah.
You don't want it to just get cut off in the middle and then like, that's basically why they were mad.
Yeah.
so I helped create a publication, and there were, 5 or 10 kids writing little articles every month or every 2 months. I can't remember if it was monthly or what. It was called the Little Red Schoolhouse.
Oh, wow.
So it was cool, but it was only local. It was only, just for the kids. And some of the teachers were left wing and kind of supported us too. But, that might be, maybe that's the way forward for people who are dissatisfied teachers, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And I,
Like
I
maybe
don't think
that's the
there's
thing, is like at the next, school meeting, like what you're talking about with the promotions, that must be happening at other schools, I would assume.
right. And I
So,
think like this is where I've also felt like sometimes people like, well, this is the struggle revolutionaries should be involved in now. It's like, no, the thing that Ben might be need to be involved in is trying to save Japanese class or something like that.
yeah, I know.
I'm
Yeah.
involved in right
I,
now is trying to make it so that teachers can decide who gets promoted or not. It's like I
yeah.
it's like that's where things and that's because things are, in my opinion, that's because there will come a time when we were all like, hey, let's all go here, let's all strike at this place. But the things are so atomized, we just can't. No one can say what's the struggle you should be involved in, even 2 miles away from you, let alone
Yeah.
2,000 miles away. And that's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I
And
mean,
so I just I feel like the biggest thing the revolutionary project has to grapple with is how crappy our situation is. But we got to grapple with it. We can't. We have to contend with it. If we don't, we're just going to continue to do like what you said, what the ISO does, which is kind of it brings revolutionaries together, removes them from the struggle, but they get to hang out in this little bubble here and feel like a little safer, like muskox.
yeah.
But they're not really being invited to get into the actual problem, which is probably why once the ISO dissolved, those people just vanished
Most of
because
them. Yeah.
yeah, because they weren't interested in like it's not easy being this frustrated and alone
Yeah.
and fearful of what's coming, but at the same time trying to say you're going to try to do something about it. That's stressful. But
Yeah.
it is what it's maybe we're not in jail, we're not in a gulag, but there's a mental gulag that we're all being put through right now. That is, I think, a different kind of torture that's happening for people who are revolutionaries. But you have to be willing to possibly be in that place and not give up. And if you did give up, I'd understand. But if you're choosing not to give up, understand that you're staying in a place that's going to be pretty uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
that's just the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I get asked by youngsters, what group should I join and all that. And I basically tell them, find a local movement or struggle or issue that you care about, or that something's happening, and join that. Sometimes I get asked, should I join DSA or the Working Families Party? I
Hmm.
tell people just join both for 6 months and just see how you like it. See who
Right.
you meet there, see who because you never know, because each branch of these little local, all politics is local,
Yeah.
and I've always had I've had the perspective of think global, act local as a Marxist for a many years now,
Yeah.
So yeah, even though I'm doing Syrian revolutionary solidarity work where I can, locally, sometimes I can go to a demonstration. I've developed relationships with people in the Syrian American community to the point where like they invite me to events. So they invite me when at the UN there was a ceremony because they took down Assad's flag and they put up the new flag,
Yeah.
and the foreign minister was coming, and I was like the only non-Syrian there,
Hmm.
So I think but to me that's kind of like how to me that's very much similar to how Karl Marx ended up being important in the First International, which is he got invited into it by British trade unionists.
Hmm.
They knew that this guy's like a friend of the working class. He's constantly writing, denouncing capitalism, and he was known in revolutionary circles from
Yeah.
1848 days. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And but I feel like how many Marxists do you know, or radicals do you know, would get invited by people who are struggling to like come to their meeting or come to their celebration or come to, not that often,
No.
because
No.
most people who are like that are just, like you said, in a bubble, or they're like talking about stuff that's not relevant to the average person, or,
Yeah.
day-to-day grievances, you know what I mean? They have nothing to say or nothing to offer. So I feel like, be like Marx, I guess I would say, I mean, the thing is, people read Marx and they think he's great and stuff, but like, there's not enough attention paid to like what he was actually trying to do and what he was actually trying to build. Like another example, he and Engels dissolved the Communist League in 1848, right on the eve of the revolution, because the way they saw it, it was like, well, yeah, we could keep having Communist League meetings, or we could go on the barricades and like fight it out, you know. And what we want to do is have all the members disperse into the revolution to influence it as much as possible. I think that was the right move, you
Mhm.
know. But from a Leninist perspective, you might say, "Oh, that's a terrible idea," because then they're not, you know, they're not
Right.
having their Communist League meetings or whatever.
Yeah, and
I
I
feel
don't
like,
know that. I think the only question comes to mind is to what extent that was done in collaboration with other people in the Communist League, right? Like what was the discussion that was had prior to that? Is it two people decide that it's gone and it goes, or is there a process by which two key leaders interact with a set of members and they come to a that thing this that's the question today that comes up in my mind, which is what process. I believe in that second process. And if the first process happened and if it dissolved because two people who were key said, we're not going to, we think it should not be done anymore, I'd have a question about what they built.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what the process
Yeah.
was, and it
Okay.
might have been one of those things that sometimes organizations and leaders make decisions that are almost like self-evident. Like everybody already agrees. Like it would be insane to just keep having meetings and not, you know. So
Yeah.
maybe it was like that too. It could have been like that. But the other thing is Marx was in charge of the newspaper, the New Reich Zeitung or something like that.
Mhm.
NRZ, that's the initials. So even though they dissolved the Communist League, he was still using a newspaper to like influence events and get certain ideas put forward and campaign around certain things. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is like in an era where there's no clear-cut answer for what people should be doing is, I
Correct.
go back and I look at like historical precedents and
Yep.
try to learn from
Yep.
the things that Marx and Engels were doing because,
And like you
pretty,
said to your students, you yourself might not join DSA. You yourself might not
yeah.
join workers. What's the Workers League? What's it called?
Oh, Working Families Party.
Working Family. I've heard about them.
Sometimes people
But
have.
you're going to say, go get involved, find out. Like people have to have their own experience. Like so we can learn through history, but we're all going to have to learn through our own experience. Both are going to have to happen. So I do think that that's the way I approach at least students. They'll get in, they might want to get involved in something that I'm like I would not get involved in. I'm saying go try it out, like and they say, wait, are you going to do that? And I'm like, well, I don't really want to put my I don't want to put my thumb on the scale for them. I want them to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, I'm somebody from Socialist Alternative that I worked with during the North Star days, um, that I got to know pretty well, was actually told me they were very surprised that I never tried to tell them to quit Socialist Alternative. And I was like,
That's
I
good.
mean, I was just like, look, if it's working for you,
Right.
that's great. And me and you work together. I'm not in
Mhm.
Socialist Alternative and you are. So therefore, that in and of itself is like a multi-tendency
Right. I
collaboration
believe in that.
across an organizational boundary. To me, that's good. If I can work with one person in RCP, Socialist Alternative, DSA, Working Families Party, if I can work with 5 or 10 different people in 5 or 10 different groups, I'm indirectly influencing the direction and the discussions of those 5 or 10 different groups. It wouldn't make it, to me, it didn't make any sense to like, even though I was against the sect system of
Mhm.
that was the predominant mode of organizing in the socialist movement at that time, 10 years ago. Um, Even though I was against the status quo, right? I didn't want to like tell people to quit. You should quit your group. I was like,
Yeah.
no, we should actually, what I'm trying to do is get all the groups to kind of like work together at least a little bit in
Right.
tandem more and more. And that's not served by telling people to quit the group. And, I don't want to tell people what to do, kind of.
Right. And the influence is that you are walking the walk of your beliefs right there. You are putting into practice saying, I think we can be revolutionaries of different threads and collaborate. And I'm going to show you we can do that. You might not even know you can do that. You might think you can't talk to the other person in the other group. You're
Yeah.
talking to me. That
Yeah.
means you can talk to them. And
Yeah.
and I think that can have that influence. So I really agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, when I remember it was actually one of the things I'm kind of proud of, as far as the North Star's accomplishments is that like Socialist Alternative ran Kashama Sawant in 2013 against a guy named Frank Chop, It's like for the state legislature, and they
Yeah.
lost, but they got 40 or 30% of the vote.
Hmm.
But the ISO refused to endorse them.
Mm.
And North Star was like the only place that could call them out on that and be like, why didn't you endorse? Like
Mm.
it was only a two-person race. It wasn't like there was like 50 million candidates. There was only two choices here.
Right.
Social and because Kshama Sawant's obviously a Trotskyist.
Right.
Like it's not like it's Bernie Sanders or some mealy mouth. The ISO, would always criticize people for not
Yeah.
being real
That,
socialists, right?
and they
So
don't have
Kshama
a
Sawant, you
they
could,
don't have a position about we stay out of elections, clearly. So that at that point, it's
right.
just sectarianism.
Right. It was just sectarianism. That's really, and they couldn't defend it. But the next election that she ran, they endorsed her.
Yeah.
So I think, calling them out and putting the spotlight on, hey, why didn't you endorse,
Mm-hmm.
like you say you want a non-sectarian left. You say you want to collaborate with, you're open to these type of things. Because the ISO was always publicly posturing as being open-minded to discussions and
Uh,
yeah, I know, but this was a concrete example of where there was no
no,
argument
yeah, no, right, right, right.
with
Yeah.
not endorsing. So I'm
Yeah.
very proud that, at least we got them to do the right thing on the second go around.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she ended up winning in 2014. She ended up winning. So that was like at the time, that was like a huge thing
Yeah.
because, a Trotskyist hadn't won an election in America, I don't think ever. That might
Mhm.
have been the first Trotskyist ever to win an election in America.
Mhm.
So anyway. How do you want to wrap up this discussion?
Um,
Is there more to
okay,
say?
well, no, I think that's it.
Okay,
I think
cool.
there's one question. I got this
Sure,
thing.
sure.
We'll see if it at it is. So, given how I've described the revolutionary organization that, as it seems to me, if if you were here in Oakland and we were living in the rough same, would you join such a thing? Because it's not even a membership thing, but is that something that you'd say, yeah, I'd be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of initiatives and organizing and all that, even though I wouldn't necessarily join a group that's calling itself revolutionary, just because I don't want to be in a sect.
Right?
But, five people in a living room is not a sect. It's not, you're too small to be a sect, kind of.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it kind of depends on what you're doing, but like, I know you from many.
It doesn't rise to the level of sex.
Right, right. You're not, a proto sect. You're a baby sect, a micro sect, or something. Like, I would be I'm open to working with pretty much anybody for anything if I feel like if it's useful or relevant,
Yeah,
however that's described. I'm not too fussy about ideology, formal ideology. Um, if it's, it could be a Catholic worker group, it could be Food Out Bombs, it could be, I've participated in many, many different types of groups with all kinds of ideologies or non-ideologies. So it's like, yeah, I would totally be interested in working with whoever, on a project of some sort. I
yeah.
thought about some people tell me that that they miss the North Star, which I when I after I left, I was like, I can't believe anybody actually missed that. But now in the long run, I was like, yeah,
It's
actually, because it was a useful place for honest discussions about, honest self-reflection on the left, which is not
yeah.
doesn't happen that many places.
Nope.
So
So
I feel like this podcast is like that's like the
we're trying.
critical thing. That's the sort of niche that it's filling that doesn't really exist out there because every other part of the leftist ecosystem, in from what I can tell, is promoting their preferred strategy for whatever. And it's a sales job, essentially. If one sect is promoting 1917 reenactment, another group is promoting 1949 reenactment because they're Maoists. And then, DSA is promoting what DSA promotes, Jacobin promotes Jacobin. Nobody's really having honest discussions about the state of the left in a way that's like giving the other position that they don't agree with a fair hearing or a fair, time to talk about their, you know what I mean? So every tendency on the left is just promoting their own tendency and
Yeah,
just being like F the other guys, which, so you can't really there's no space for that type of conversation, honest conversation
yeah,
elsewhere. So I feel like your podcast is like, I can't think of any other places offhand. There's probably other things that I'm not aware of, small publications or
yeah,
podcasts. But yeah, I mean, if we lived in the same city, sure, it would be good to hang out or do a study group or,
yeah.
read stuff or chat or I don't know what kind of stuff you're involved in really.
I
Um,
honestly, I would need to find another revolutionary and meet with them, and they say, "Well, what do you think we should do?" Like that's what how would have to happen. Right now, I just have I'm in my own head, and I don't know what we would do, but I would want to do something. But that's why I know I'm looking to build like an organization again, it's just what we want to build, and so it's the process of doing that I think would instruct me. But I'm really glad we talked because, before we started recording, I was like thinking we shouldn't have this episode. Michael couldn't make it, but I'm really glad you said, "Hey, no, we can go forward with this," because I think actually this was very instructive for me, Ben, like in terms of seeing where you stand on some of these questions, like seeing where we seem to align, where there's some differences. I think the discussion itself is it's very inspiring for me that, we can have these kind of conversations. We might have some big differences about Ukraine or Syria or Libya. It does matter. It does
so
matter. That's all I'll say. But it doesn't have to be defining of being able to work together.
it's not an existential,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So
it's not a life or death matter.
I'm
Yeah.
excited about that. And so I'm
So,
really glad you said, "Hey, let's just proceed," because I think this was useful. And I think Michael will enjoy this
hope
discussion.
so.
Yeah, I think so.
Hope so. I mean,
Um,
I'm sure he'll have stuff to say about the whatever he had to say about the topic. I'm sure there's a way to bring in his contribution in the Leninism context.
Yeah. And now we'll be
You know,
coming back to that. I know that.
yeah.
Is there any final thoughts you want to have about anything you've heard here today?
Final thoughts. Trying to think. I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty much on similar pages,
Hmm.
I do think if people want to read more about this topic, like how do socialists organize, what to do, I think the essays that Hal Draper wrote in 1973 are actually pretty good. Like Anatomy of a Microsect, his name is one of the names of the essays, and the other one is I think it's called Another Road, which is kind of like the same topic,
Right.
you know.
We'll put that in the description. We'll put
Okay.
links to those. That's probably, I think I've read I remember reading the anatomy, and that's in the Marxist.org site, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we'll put those.
It's still a good essay. Those are still, some classics. So I think it's
Yeah.
worth looking at.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ben, for
Mhm.
having this discussion with me. And we'll put some of the things, the articles you described in the description in the notes below. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenge the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes or wherever you found this episode or on our blog, what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. And if you want to reach out to us about ideas for future episodes, like Ben did here, because now we're going to have Ben work. This is just part two of possibly part 5 or 6 other conversations we're going to be having. So if you have ideas for future episodes, feel free to use the link to contact us at What's Left directly. Please, if you liked what you heard here today, please subscribe, rate, or review, turn on your notifications to any of our 7 platforms on Spotify, iTunes, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, or Telegram. And that's it. For Andy and for Ben, thank you very much, folks, for listening, and we'll see you next week.